Hello everybody, welcome to another tutorial from Sound for More. It's Leo speaking. Today we continue the journey on learning the Obsidian synth. Before I start, please I'd like to remind all my viewers to subscribe if you haven't already done so, as it helps the channel to grow. So let's click on the plus sign and let's create an Obsidian default track and let's double click on it. We have already seen the performance page, so let's move on to the patch page. This is where you can manage all your patches. So on the left hand side you see your banks. So at the moment I have selected all banks, but you can select the users banks, the factory banks, and also the in-apps purchase banks. You can see I have purchased a number of banks already, and I really recommend them because they're really nice. Now, you can also click here where it says manage. When you click on manage, you can delete, import, export patches, and you can also refresh the database if you see something that is also missing. Let's go back to the browse functionality. Now, let's select factory so you can see all the factory on the right hand side. So all the patches which are factory by default on the right hand side. Now, on the middle, you have a possibility to select tags which are associated to patches to further filter down the patches that you're looking for. So, for example, you can say, show me all the lead patches or show me all the patches like that. You can also select multiple tags. So you can say, show me all the pads and also lead patches. And in this case, you have an OR at the top as a selection, which means that it will show you all the patches which have a lead or a tag as pad. But of course, if you were to select end, then the list will change because it will show you only the patches which are lead and also pad. Of course, if you were to add a further category, as you can see, you have only one patch available, which is a lead and pad and also a base. So remember, as you select pads and the different function settings at the top, whether you select end or between different tags. Let's click on X to exit there. So on the right hand side, you see all the different patches and the list of it. You have also an hamburger menu on the top right. Click on it, and this is where you can initialize your patch. Perfect. Or you can save a patch, save it with a different name, delete it, copy and paste. Standard functionality, really. Now, let's ensure that we have initialized the patch and yeah, that sounds okay. Also, let's open the settings for the keyboard here. Let's ensure that we have velocity touch so that we can change the velocity as we click on the keyboard. Perfect. And then I'll leave to your taste if you want to select a different scale. In this case, I selected for today a major pentatonic because I thought make it sound a little bit happier. So let's go to the Edith page now. Okay, so let's start the journey on how this synth works. So you have top left an oscillator section, okay? You have a filter section on the top right, and then at the bottom left, you have envelope for, if you click here on the down arrow, for amplitude, filter, pitch, and also 2 additional envelopes to use as you need. On the right hand side, on the bottom right hand side, you have the selection for LFO. You click again on the down arrow, you have 5 different LFOs. You can see the default one is already associated to the pitch course parameter. Okay, so on the top left, as I mentioned, you have oscillator on the left hand side, 3 of them, and on the right hand side you have 2 filters, 1 and 2 there. And you can also set them as parallel series. You can have a global setting, etc., which we'll look at a next tutorial. So let's focus for today on the oscillator part. And we will focus first on one type of synthesis for this tutorial, the analog synthesis. As you can see, there are different types of synthesis. You have analog, wavetables, you have phase distortion, you have frequency modulation, you have a nano-saw, which different detunes saw waves, which works really well, noise, and then you can have up to 24 different samples in your patch, which is really nice. But let's focus on the analog type of synthesis. So starting from the top, you can enable or disable that oscillator, which is selected. In this case, I have oscillator number 1 selected, but there are 3. As you can see, the second one is disabled by default, as the third one is disabled by default. So let's focus on the first one, and let's ensure that we have analog as type of synthesis. So at the bottom here on the left of this section, you find common controls. So you have level, standard, double click to go back to the default setting, tuning, sense, double click to go back to the original settings. Here you have a filter knob at the moment is directing the sound, the output to filter number 1. You can have it between filter number 1 and 2 or only to filter number 2. And this setting as well, the setting below, will change based on what you select on the filter, which I will show later. Now on the bottom left of this section, we have the phase control, so phasing. And then you also have keyboard tracking, where you can use keyboard tracking really to tune and detune your keyboards, which is really nice. So let's say that we go to C3. If I change it up and down, it stays the same. But if I move down to, because it uses that key as a reference, but if I move down to another key, let's position this to the middle, 100%. It's going up, or it's going down, right? So you can use and key tracking to actually change your tuning in the keyboard, which is really nice. Now, so to show you how this filter button works, so we go to the filter section. We have the first one enabled, the second one is disabled. So we leave the first one enabled. We just reduce the cutoff here. You can see it changing. And you can see if I move this filter up to number 2, which is disabled, it goes back as not having a filter. And of course I can have these in the middle, something like that, which goes to both filters. And this is useful because you might want to say, okay, I want to have 2 filters still in parallel, and then the second one I leave it something like that, less cutoff, but a lot of resonance. And then you can alternate on this filter knob, for example, with an LFO. Up to you, of course. So let's set it as default. Let's disable filter 2. Let's go back to have only the filter 1 active in the default settings. Okay, the parameter below, which is called width, is used to act on stereo width. So to see that in action, what you need to do is you need to go to parallel, set the filters in stereo configuration, left to right, as you can see here. And then you need to change the type of synthesis. So for example, if we go to NanoStudio, you see that the width is enabled. And you can go to mono or enhance the stereo spread of the sound. Okay, let's set that as default and let's go back to parallel on the filter. So we'll look at that function in more detail later on. Now here you have a transpose function, which is common again. So you click on it, you can transpose up by 12 semitone, 12, 24, etc. So go back like that, 0. Or you can go up and down by semitones. Like so. And let's go back to type of synthesis analog. Now, on the right side here, as analog type of synthesis, at the moment we have a saw waveform. You can select sine. Really nice. Triangle. You can have poles. You can also have a bipoles, which is different from a standard square. Okay, for the waveform of pulse and bipulse, you can have also pulse width modulation. Really nice. And then additionally, what you can do, you can further customize the sound using sync options. And you have 2 types, analog and digital. The digital allows you only to set the duration, so how frequently you have the waveform to be triggered again. And in analog mode, you can also set the hardness. And it's quite interesting because if you set the ratio down to 1:1, so no changes, you set the hardness to max, it's almost the same sound as digital and off. Definitely between off and digital is the same. With analog, you have some differences, of course, because the way the algorithm works. And to explain a little bit more how this works, if I go to AUM, I have set NanoStudio as an interrupt app, and I have added an oscillator here. Okay, so let's pause this. You can see the waveform there. Okay, let's go back to NanoStudio, and let's close that. At the moment, you see is analog, hardness, max, and of course, if you set down to, for example, 0, Resume. You can see is different, much smoother. It doesn't have the same hard touch. So remember how these, of course, works because it can become handy. So let's set these two off as well. So other things we need to look for this section, you can enable a different oscillator, so up to 3. So let's enable number 2. Let's ensure the number 1. So the number 1, let's put it to sine. Number 2, we put it to, square. And of course, you can set the different levels for each one of them. But the reason I activated the second oscillator is because I want to go to the velocity settings. So there are 3 types of settings here based on how you want the different oscillators to react. At the moment, they're set on layers, so you see 3 layers here. So depending on where you click on the keyboard and therefore depending on the velocity of the notes, you can see the red horizontal bar changing up and down, okay? So higher velocity, the bar is the top, lower velocity, the bar is at the bottom. So knowing that, you can then use this first parameter here to move up and down the split, okay? And if you have the third oscillator, you will see that the third one here active. And then you can use this parameter here to make it smoother in terms of movement between one to the other. So let's try. So you can see down here, you hear only oscillator number 1, and as you move up, you start to hear gradually, because I've added a bit of moving here, the oscillator number 2. You can have it in a split configuration. Again, it works very similar. You can move the split up and down here, and then you can change the smoothness between one to the other, or how it moves from one to the other in terms of intensity. And you can have also a free split. Okay, same functionality. You check with this control the split here, and with this one, the split there, and then you use the middle ones to set how this move between one to the other. Really nice. Then next we have a voice control. So at the moment it's set to 8th polyphony, but you can go up to 32. Now, if you go down to 1, it will say 1 mono. If you go further down, it will say 1 glide. And this is where you can set your legato and glide between different notes. So let's deactivate legato and let's listen. Okay, and let's listen with legato. So hopefully you should be able to hear the difference. So with legato, the movement is smoother between one note to the other. The other thing you can do here at the bottom is change the number of unison voices, and you can go up to 4. Oh, actually, let me go back to layer here. Okay, and let's do that, default, because otherwise you don't hear correctly all the notes, which is what was happening a moment ago. So you can have unison here, up to 4 voices. You can set the detuning here, and the stereo spread. And of course, I don't have to tell you that you can use LFOs or envelopes on those controls, which therefore becomes much, much more interesting when you're actually creating or designing your sound. So hopefully this has been useful to you, and thank you. See you at the next tutorial. Bye.